for the video.
All
All right, y'all can pick who goes first.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, or? All right.
Yeah, sure. Hold up a second. So I do recognize that global warming is real. I believe that humans do contribute to it to an extent. I also believe that we should try to combat it. However, I do not feel the best way to combat global warming is through government intervention. I believe the best way to combat it is through deregulation of the market and through market environmentalism, which I can go more into, but that's basically my stance. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't have a ton prepared either, but I'll just kind of. Yeah. So for opening statement. But yeah, so I am for government regulation in order to combat global warming and climate change. I think that also in general, free market environmentalism has major flaws in the philosophy, and that if you were to deregulate other environmental regulations, that could have major repercussions that could be really serious. That could screw up the climate. And so I think it's really important that we do have government regulations and that we enact those as soon as possible in order to try to prevent catastrophe. That's all I got.
All right. Yeah. So, do you want to start with like the carbon tax or something like that?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about the carbon tax. Yeah. So I'm in favor of a carbon tax, right? So basically the idea behind that being a tax that you levied on carbon content, right? Just in order to try to discourage any usage of carbon, which is obviously really one of like the most harmful things for the environment in general.
All right. So I just have like one question. So
yeah,
with the carbon tax, would this just be like on would this just be on factories and like energy production, or would it be on stuff such as like your house or cars?
it would be on everything because it's essentially, there's a lot of hidden costs when it comes to carbon, right? Because of the effects it has on the environment. So if you're buying something that is going to release carbon into the environment, like just at like the store, that might come off. It might, it's a certain price in the store, but actually it's much more expensive when you look at the costs behind it because of the effects of it. So essentially the carbon tax would just take that into account. So it would be anything.
All right. So, well, one, I kind of want to get into the practicality of that. So I don't know how you would successfully be able to quantify it and measure everything and tax that effectively. So if you could go into that.
Yeah, and that's you couldn't do it perfectly. It would be you'd have to estimate. I don't have any exact figures, but you could estimate the amount of environmental harm done by each individual, whatever it is, and have a concept. And it wouldn't be perfectly accurate, but in theory, it would take that into account and hopefully discourage people from buying this thing after they realize the actual hidden costs behind it.
Okay. So I'll get into like my first contention on it. And that is, I think that the carbon tax would basically slow down economic growth. And I don't think it's great for the economy to do that. So would you disagree with that necessarily?
I think it's debatable. I think that it would, in certain aspects, I think it would focus put more attention onto something like renewable energy. I also think, though, that we have to kind of look at realistically, even if there is some level of harm done to the economy, even if you were to argue that it would hurt the economy, I think you have to weigh that versus the environmental benefits and realize that you're right, and that it potentially could cause economic harm. So I think it's questionable, but I think that that's balanced out, or that's preferable to the potential climate effects of not having a carbon tax.
All right. Makes sense. So basically your stance is the positive sort of not destroying the environment outweighs the potential economic slowing or whatever,
essentially
lack of growth.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. So when you compare GDP to us in Sweden, who does have the carbon tax, we have similar GDP to CO2 emissions or some, and I can pull up the statistics if you want, but I mean, I don't really see any evidence of this actually being effective, I guess.
I think, I haven't looked at Sweden's GDP versus carbon tax, but I think that the I think that just from a rational standpoint, I think it would be effective in the U.S. I don't know about Sweden. I could look at that. But when you just from this basic standpoint of a lot of people, I don't think are aware of the hidden costs behind purchasing something like that. And I mean, just like a carbon tax would encourage looking into things like renewable energy, electric cars, stuff like that. And I think just in general that there would be that. And I haven't looked at Sweden, so I'm not 100% sure. But I think that also maybe the GDPs are similar to, but they're obviously very different countries in a lot of different ways. So I think culturally there's major differences there.
Yeah.
And I think that there would be, I think also it can maybe be argued, I think that in Sweden there's probably more awareness over that, the carbon tax, this concept, right? Like the carbon tax, the hidden costs behind it already. I think the U.S. a large. I don't actually have any stats to back that up honestly, but I think that there's a large group of people that just aren't aware of this idea that there's like hidden costs to carbon. So I just think that there would be two different results.
And I agree with socially being more mindful of our footprint, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not necessarily saying just destroy the environment. It's all cool, but I'm also not saying that it's necessarily the role of the government to intervene and to place these rules, these regulations, which I believe don't actually help and just further hurt the economy and hurt our freedoms and all that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, no, and I get that. I think that there has so a couple of things. So first of all, so you're from like a free market environmentalist standpoint, are you also opposed to other government regulations that like are in place like right now? A law about like.
So I kind of adhere to the non-aggression principle when it comes to a lot of these things. So if there's a company that's putting out a lot of dangerous chemicals into the air surrounding their city, right, they're harming other individuals. So obviously I wouldn't be cool with that. Some place which like China where you can't even go out and breathe normally, obviously I don't see that as a good thing. And I think that there's a place for the government within that, but putting taxes on that kind of stuff and some regulations I don't see as beneficial.
Right. Okay. So when you talk about stuff like the kind of like the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or something like that, you're okay with that because it's potentially like could hurt people, or are you opposed to those?
No, not regulations, but I think it opens up to courts. You can go and sue somebody in court for damaging them,
right?
Rather than just putting people there.
So I think the issue with that, because that's what I thought, is logistically that's problematic because if let's say we were to, and I don't know if you're saying this, but let's say we were to like scrap like the Clean Air Act, right? And the idea being if a company pollutes the air, then you sue them for damages. I just logistically don't see that working as well, right? Because let's say like in LA, somebody has respiratory issues because of the massive amount of air pollution, so they want to sue somebody. Like where do you even go with that? Because there's just so much. The other thing, I don't want to like throw too many things at once, but this is related. Is also how do you feel about, sorry, give me 1 second. Where did I write that down? Sorry. Yeah, fuel efficiency, right. How do you feel, because this is kind of related, about fuel efficiency standards like for vehicles?
Like I said, I don't really like these regulations. I think it slows economic growth. And I can kind of give more of an explanation for why I think economic growth is important for environmentalism. I don't know if you're familiar with the Kuznets curve.
Yeah.
So basically, that's kind of my reasoning for this, right? So I think removing regulations will allow for more economic growth, to allow for society to have more money, we'll have more wealth, right? And we'll want to take care of our earth because it's important to us. We value that. I think generally human beings will act out of, I don't know, goodness of their heart to kind of help, regardless if there's a government or not intervening.
Right. And I think to a certain extent that's true, but I think that's an optimistic perspective because I think just, especially in America, which is like such a divided country, so only 37% of Americans think that reducing the effects of global warming will require ordinary Americans to make major sacrifices. Only 38% think that would describe climate change as a crisis. And a lot of them think it's like an issue, but I think a lot of people don't entirely understand how severe it is. And while eventually people might start, once you start to see like the major repercussions, like when you have like even more severe like tropical storms and more forest fires, people will start to care more, but then it's going to be too late, right? We already are seeing scientists say like, oh, in the next decade, 2 decades, like we need like to change like really soon or else it's going to be a kind of inevitable that, greenhouse gas effect continues. I just can't really see where you go ahead.
Oh no, you can continue if are you done with that?
I was just like, I just can't really see any future where if we just leave it up to the free market, where people will quickly enough realize how severe it is and be able to turn things around.
All right. Well, I would like to first state off that the United States isn't the only country in the world, right? So we have to realize there's other countries, and we're not even the top contributor to the actual global warming crisis or anything like that. Like if you look at these third world countries, they're polluting at way higher amounts. If you look at China, they're polluting at a way higher amount than us. So I think there is only so much we can do. And I think the best role for us as a country would be to maybe get ahead of new energy, right? So opening up nuclear energy, I think that's a good way to combat global warming, because nuclear energy, it's really efficient and it doesn't have the harmful effects as coal and oil and all that, right? So
sure.
That's just one example. But
yeah. Well, I think, okay, so I'll talk about both of those. So I think, first of all, you're totally right. The U.S. is not the only country in the world. We are per capita, we emit in 2017, we were 4th in CO2 emissions per capita. So I mean, there is definitely issues. Also, when you see like people like Trump like backing out of like the Green New Deal and stuff like that, I think the best thing for the country, for the world in general, if the United States, makes promises about keeping our emissions down, that's going to hopefully influence other countries. I think China is especially kind of an issue just because of they have massive amounts of pollution. But I think the U.S. has to kind of take the lead on that and be willing to do something, and not just kind of be like, okay, well, we can do stuff, but other countries are still going to pollute, so there's not really a point. In terms of nuclear energy, I think nuclear energy is preferable to fossil fuels. I think that nuclear energy also though has some like obvious issues, in terms of just like there's high risk there. I think solar energy, wind, hydroelectric energy, stuff like that, I think there's definitely a lot of potential for that. I know which country, I'm forgetting which country it was, maybe Finland produces like largely off of hydroelectric energy, like twice the amount of energy. I'm not sure if it was Finland. I think it was a Scandinavian country. Twice the amount of energy they need, or maybe it's Denmark. I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of potential for renewable energy. And, I think that, be it nuclear or, in my opinion, preferably something like solar or wind, we have the ability to, if we invest in that more, to improve that. And, currently, because of government subsidies, renewable energy is gotten a lot cheaper and a lot more affordable. But I think without the government pushing nuclear energy, it's hard for me, or any renewable energy, it's hard for me to imagine that, large fossil fuel companies are going to, like, within the next decade, fold or greatly lose influence. Because that's the other thing is, again, like we have this really small time frame. We need to change like soon. And I just think if the U.S. stops regulating things, I have a hard time imagining that the free market is going to be able to adjust that quickly enough to,
Well, I think there is damages, but I don't necessarily see it as in the next 10 years or 20 years, as you're saying. They've been saying that for like the last 50 years, as I'm sure you are aware.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, it's true. But, well, you're right. But I think you're right that probably within the next 10 or 20 years, we won't see catastrophic effects. But the thing is that within a short period of time, we're, every like year or two that we continue to keep having, like you've seen the healing curve, right? The graph. Yeah. Every year or two, it just gets way more severe, right? I know, like last year we saw like fires in like California, there's an insane amount of fires. We're getting tropical storms in the summer, like every year now. We're having like severe hurricanes, and it's just going to keep getting worse. there's
Yeah.
positive feedback loops, right? Where like, which basically is like something happen, like something points, one thing occurs, which causes a second thing to occur that causes the first thing to occur more, right? Which just, keeps looping, getting more severe. So every year that we don't do something about this, it gets hotter, and then more permafrost is going to melt, which releases more methane into the atmosphere. It makes it get more hot, which makes more permafrost melt. And so I think it's really, maybe, I'm sure, scientists are always kind of saying it's really important we do something now, but we do need to do something soon because it's clearly starting to have serious repercussions.
All right. So I think one of my biggest stances on reducing CO2 emissions is really on nuclear energy. So I kind of want to go back to the energy. So you mentioned, you mentioned wind, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with the wind and solar, I just don't see those, especially right now, as something that's very promising. So with wind, I believe you need about 2,000 wind turbines per one nuclear plant, which is a big area because these things are really spread out.
Sure.
I don't know the exact mileages, but it's in the probably tens or hundreds of square miles, right?
Right.
So that's a lot of area you need just for one nuclear plant where you can put in probably like 20 square miles, probably less. But
No, I get what you're saying.
as of right now, I think nuclear energy is the most promising. I think there's a stigma around it just because the word nuclear, they think of atomic bombs and stuff like that. But I think it's not really as dangerous as it's made out, especially with modern technology. It's very easily well contained. So I think what we need to do is kind of remove the monopoly on that, let the free market kind of take advantage of nuclear energy, and that'll help evolve it more. And I think moving away from fossil fuels, moving away from that kind of stuff that's non-renewable is going to be more beneficial. So.
Sure. And I think, and again, like I prefer nuclear energy over fossil fuels for sure.
Yeah.
And you're right that there definitely is, I think, a lot of kind of this automatic like fear over the idea of nuclear energy. But I think the nuclear energy is high risk. It's not as high risk maybe as people assume it is when you like, but there definitely is risk there. It's a potential target for terrorism, right? They have to get rid of the nuclear waste, which is a major environmental issue.
Yeah, that's true.
And you have just potential for like accidents. It's just like it's much more high risk. And wind. I don't know how feasible wind would be on a large scale. I think solar would be feasible on a large scale. But even for nuclear energy is really expensive. I'm not entirely sure if it's from the free market. I'm not entirely sure where that money is going to come from. I don't know who's really interested in investing that much into nuclear energy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, obviously it's going to be probably some rich people, but I kind of lost my train of thought. I was going to go somewhere with solar. So yeah, I think solar has somewhat potential, maybe on an individual use. But right now they're not very sustainable, and they don't last that long. You have to replace them pretty often. So it really isn't much economically cheaper to use solar right now. But I think as time goes on, as the technology gets better, I think there's potential there.
And I think that's again why I think it's important that we do have the government, that we don't have just the free market, because I think with the free market, that innovation into solar energy in order to make it more affordable kind of becomes more expensive. It goes away to a certain extent. And I mean, in the free market, presumably the government would be also not subsidizing coal, but the government's subsidizing renewables a lot more than they're subsidizing coal right now. And you're still seeing, the costs they're competitive. So it seems like there's definitely, if we stop something.
Okay, I was just going to ask, so why do you think that government intervention within solar energy is necessarily making it better?
Well, again, because I think that when the government, first of all, because that drives the cost down, and then also because, like you said, there does need to be more. Hopefully, we can make it more technologically advanced. And when the government's encouraging innovation into solar energy, you're going to see more technological developments, right? Than if they're not. Hopefully, in theory, at least.
Anywhere we see the government subsidizing stuff, we never see the prices go down. They always go up. If you look at colleges, if you look at pharmaceuticals, every time the government gets in there, subsidizes and tries
Well,
making
with
it cheaper, it always does the opposite. I mean,
but renewables are going down, right? The government has been subsidizing them, and they actually have been dropping.
in what?
And that, but the renewable energy costs have been
I
dropping.
mean, maybe in the short term, and that's probably just, yeah, that's true. I don't necessarily. Do you have any kind of statistic on that?
Yeah, I
Because
can
I
give it
haven't
in a
actually
second.
looked in that specific.
I did not mark it down, but I did. I saw it. So give me a second. I will find it.
But I think it's also like an emerging technology too. So with anything,
That's
as it
true. I
comes
mean, we
into the
can't.
market, you can't
Yeah, we can't
completely attribute to
entirely.
it.
You're right. We can't. There's not necessarily causation there. But let me see if I can find that stat. Plunging prices. Yeah. This is a few years old, but yeah. Well, currently renewable energy is beating coal on cost. I don't see renewable energy prices keep. Yeah. Okay. Here. Renewable energy prices keep falling. It's a headline from Utility Debt. In 2018, and here I finally found one. In 2018, with utility scale solar experiencing the largest year-over-year decline at 26%. So it's pretty rapidly, falling in terms of cost.
Right.
And again, we can't entirely 100%. I would agree that it's potentially hard to differentiate between correlation and causation there, because we don't know that it's all government subsidies. But I think it's preferable to continue to subsidize it than risk, because again, this is kind of high stakes. If we don't subsidize it and the cost goes up again, it would kind of stops, it like levels out, and potentially fossil fuels are still competitive with it or even cheaper than it again, then it's going to be an issue, because you're going to probably see more investment into fossil fuels again.
I mean, back to the nuclear energy, it is more efficient cost-wise too than fossil fuels. I mean, there's some technology that goes into it, but I think once you have the science down on it, it's a lot more efficient than any fossil fuel. So I don't necessarily see fossil fuels making a comeback. Also, we're kind of running low on that stuff too. Fossil fuels.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first I'll talk about. I mean, you're right that coal's dropping, but oil is still relatively high. I mean, it's. But then in terms of, you are correct that we have to keep finding it. So are you also because you're free market, are you opposed to the government regulating things like fracking? Like, are you opposed to government regulations on how we just acquire?
Okay, I can go over that a little bit. So I think anywhere you kind of have private property, land's usually better taken care of. So I can kind of put this with fracking. I don't necessarily see the issue with fracking, as long as I don't see really the issue with fracking, because I think usually people will try to take care of their land better. Because so say you own a piece of land and then you go and destroy it, then it's kind of worthless at that point, right?
Right. I think what you're not necessarily taking into account is this idea that a company can purchase a piece of land, destroy it, make profit from it because they've frack whatever, recover a lot of resources from it, and be done with it. Potentially still turn a profit because they bought it for less than they're getting from the resources they recover from it.
Yeah, that's true, but I think they're not. They're going to try getting every bit of profit they can out of it, and they're going to try turning around and selling that land, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know if you've seen. Have you seen like the strip mining where they're there's mines where they'll like blow the top off a mountain basically, and then just totally level it in order to recover the resources inside of it. And I think that's I think it's maybe a little more of a cynical view, but I think that in the end, a lot of these corporations, they want profit, right? And so they maybe don't want to destroy the land, but if it's going to make them money, then they'll do what they have to.
I mean, that's also another thing with limited resources. So I don't really see what necessarily the solution to that is, right?
Well, I think that's why if in theory, if you were to regulate that more and be like, I think hydraulic fracking is incredibly harmful to the environment. If you just regulate that and basically make it more difficult for companies to do that, then because that's usually in order to recover like fossil fuels. So then those kind of correlate. So if you were to outlaw that or regulate it heavily, that would in theory cause a decline in fossil fuels. And then if the government's also subsidizing renewables, then hopefully renewables go up, fossil fuels go down, the destruction of the environment from fracking also goes down.
So if the cost of retrieving this fossil fuels is more expensive than using renewable energy, then I don't see why exactly they would still be trying to try to retain the resources, right?
If the cost of obtaining it isn't necessarily more difficult. Okay. Oh wait. So you're saying?
Well, there's a whole process that goes into it, but yeah.
Right, but I mean, yes, but if they have the ability, like they are, in terms of like getting the resources, I think it's relatively doable. Like that's the costs are more the environmental impact of it than the actual.
Well, yeah, but
recovery
they would not be able to compete, though, is what I'm saying.
So you mean? No, sorry, go ahead.
If renewable energy gets to the point where it's more cost effective to use renewable energy than it is to use fossil fuels, then there would be no reason to try and grab these fossil fuels, fracking or all that stuff. There would be no use for that because it would be they wouldn't be able to compete essentially.
Well, I think the thing is that, I mean, so renewable energy, while it might be cheaper in the long run, there is this, like, I mean, for like the idea of like getting like solar energy, is that like upfront investment, right? Like buying an electric car, while potentially this can save money in the long run, it's expensive upfront. A lot of people can't afford to like invest into solar energy, especially when again, if the government, this is with the government subsidizing it. So if the government doesn't, then potentially, we don't know.
Yeah. And I think also just back to kind of the Kuznets curve, as society gets more wealthy, they'll be able to produce more of these electric cars and stuff that are more high end than they are right now, right? So
Sure.
A poor country is not going to be able to afford electric cars if they're expensive, whereas a more wealthy country would be able to afford that more easily.
Right. But again, the idea, when it comes down to cost, I mean, the government can help that when you get tax breaks for buying an electric car. If it like going back to what I was saying earlier about like fuel efficiency, right? If the government, like, let's say the government just is like, forget about fuel efficiency. In theory, people are going to buy cars with really bad fuel efficiency because they have to pay more for gas. But this, right, so that they're just like, okay, so we're just not going to worry about it because people won't buy really inefficient cars because they're going to have to pay more in the long run for gas. But if you look at those cars, they're probably going to end up being really cheap because they're really inefficient. And then you're going to see them still being purchased because lower income people can't afford that upfront investment into a more efficient car. So I think it's kind of the same thing. And then also there's this time crunch, right? Where again, I know we don't know for sure that like the next 10 years we need to turn things around, but if the government isn't subsidizing and isn't pushing electric vehicles, by the time that electric vehicles are affordable in the US, it very well could be too late for that to really have a major impact on our emissions.
Yeah. Here. All right, so I guess we can kind of go into transportation. So yeah, transportation is responsible for, let me see, I have a statistic right here. It's responsible for 28% of all emissions. So for perspective, industry is only 22% of emissions.
Right.
So it's more than industry. So I think one of the most effective ways to be able to combat it is through definitely having our transportation more eco-friendly. So how exactly, you kind of went over, but what regulations would you put in place to make it more likely to use electric vehicles?
So first of all, just really quickly, about that, like I was saying, like fuel efficiency, I think fuel efficiency standards are really important, just separate from electric vehicles in terms of trying to keep emissions down through transportation. And then I think the U.S. is, they're giving tax breaks in turn when you buy an electric vehicle, you get a tax break. I think that the U.S. shouldn't continue to encourage that through tax breaks, through investing potentially in electric vehicles. And I think that, and I think really what my biggest thing is if the U.S. stops kind of pushing the idea that you need to have, that it's good to have a relatively efficient vehicle that's preferably electric, that I think you're going to see people kind of fall back on these cheap, inefficient vehicles that just, exacerbate or just worsen the situation.
I mean, I don't necessarily see, I don't see electric vehicles as too unaffordable for compared to other newer cars. Like Tesla released new models that I believe are like around 20,000, aren't they?
I'm not sure.
I'm not going to say that for a fact, but I do know they had some new models that weren't like $60,000 or whatever. So I think letting the market kind of do its thing, we're going to come up with cheaper solutions, and opening the market to allow more competition within stuff like electric vehicles will be a effective way to produce more competition. So would you agree, like removing any kind of barriers that would be in the way of starting like an electric car company?
Would I agree that it's
like there shouldn't be any kind of barriers to create an electric car company?
Sure. Well, I think, I think besides, you should, in theory, it should be as easy as realistically possible to start an electric car company. Sure. But I still, again, there's not really, this is with the government. The government is like pushing electric cars, right? Like the tax breaks. And so we have to take that into account. But still, the demand for electric cars is relatively low. And there's just, you have car companies that like these huge non-electric car companies that I think if you have a free market, it's hard for me to picture like a company like Tesla being able to fully throughout the country kind of continue to keep getting its prices lower to continue to override car companies that aren't electric.
All right, so the problem is you think you won't see Tesla outperforming non-electric car companies?
I think if in a competitive situation, I think that having an electric car, being electric in itself, isn't necessarily going to be enough to to gain interest over non-electric vehicles.
Yeah, and I think part of that is making them a little more convenient, like having to charge them
right
so often, and it's not incredibly convenient. Tesla's kind of made it a little more convenient for road trips. They have like road stops, which are kind of cool. But
right.
So I think obviously we can't just switch over to electric cars overnight. I don't know how. I think it would be a gradual process, and I think the main problem you see with a gradual process is you see this as an urgent issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's again why I think it's preferable if the government is there to kind of try to speed the process along to a certain extent by trying to make them more affordable, and even you can investing potentially in electric cars, maybe investing in charging stations to just try to make it more convenient and affordable, as opposed to just kind of waiting for the free market to drive down the price to where it's realistic.
Would you be in favor of, I don't know, putting like some sort of sanctions on companies that aren't being consciously environmental? Because kind of like to my other point, we're not the only country. There's other countries, and it's kind of everybody has to do their part for it to work.
Yeah. So I'm not, I don't know a ton about about the idea of foreign relations, but I think first of all, if the U.S. government were to invest more in green energy, maybe with like a caveat that other countries do, like a sort of Green Deal type thing, I think that would potentially be a good way of encouraging them. But also when it comes to a certain point, yeah, I think if a country is either refusing to or not meeting the kind of level that you're hoping to get all the countries down to, like in terms of emissions, then I think that sanctions are reasonable. I think you need to, because again, the U.S. is like one of the leading countries in the world. I think it's important that we kind of set that standard.
Right. So what's to stop necessarily? So say we put like a carbon tax on industry and stuff. So Sweden did this, and a lot of companies actually left, like IKEA, Volvo. Those are like the two biggest companies there. They left Sweden recently, not necessarily just because of the carbon tax, but taxes in general and stuff like that. So what's to stop companies from just moving somewhere without these regulations, without these insanely high taxes?
Right. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, nothing. If they want to leave, they're going to leave. I think there's the question of whether it's more profitable for them to leave versus just invest, especially because we're hoping that like green energy is kind of going to be the wave of the future, right? And so if you're just encouraging companies to invest in green energy, it's questionable whether it makes more sense for them to just outsource everything or just invest in green energy. Especially, I mean, in America's case, I think, there's maybe more to it. I think there's kind of this whole sort of patriotism surrounding America and like, oh, made in America type craftsmanship. So I think people are going to, in theory, companies are going to lose business because you're going to have companies who are willing to fill that void and are willing to invest in green energy in order to avoid paying the carbon tax. It just kind of supports it. I think it would just influence competition in terms of trying to use less carbon. But if they want to leave, then I think they're going to leave. I think when it comes down to it, we have to prioritize. Again, we have to prioritize the economy. That's worth less than the environment,
So with the carbon tax, the problem is I see like a whole new layer of bureaucracy. I see a whole new level of corruption, right? So some of the big oil companies have actually supported carbon tax, and is that not suspicious to you at all?
I mean, yeah, actually, I don't know that much about that, but that definitely does seem suspicious. I know there already is a ton of corruption because there's this whole, I'm not sure about the details on this, but I know there's this like the idea where you can, you get like carbon credits for like planting trees and stuff like that. So there's companies that are like clear cut areas and then plant trees and then they'll get more carbon emissions. So there definitely there's corruption, there's loopholes we need to fill. And I mean, I can't necessarily account for that. We need to, I think we need to figure out a way to do this in the way that I would be implementing the carbon tax in theory would, in theory it would work. And you would hopefully close any loopholes. But when it comes down to just corruption and bureaucracy, there's not the ton that I can say. We need the right people, I think, in power who are able to, stand up for that and not not allow like lobbyists to basically convince them to turn a blind eye.
I have strong distrust for the government. So, but yeah, I kind of understand. Like, you're just gonna hope that people in power are trying to get rid of that corruption, but with any kind of regulation or stuff like this, it always inevitably just halts competition. It always just puts another barrier for any kind of new company trying to come in and innovate. So I think that just adds another level of bureaucracy and just corruption to the system that we already have, which is still in progress.
No, that's fair. I think that in theory, if we want to put barriers between companies that are trying to create businesses that aren't necessarily environmentally friendly, which is why like a carbon tax, in theory at least, wouldn't necessarily hurt a company that is eco-friendly. It would actually help them because, it's giving them a boost over companies that are relying on carbon and now their products are more expensive because of it. But no, there's definitely, in order to, I think that the government should be trying to foster competition in terms of who can take the lead in like renewable energy for the future. And I think that maybe the price of that is potentially kind of not having less competition in terms of like carbon friendly companies that are already environmentally harmful. because you're making it harder for like new companies to kind of come up there. But I think that's beneficial because we don't want more companies reliant on like coal, and fossil fuels.
Yeah. All right. We don't have that many more points. If you have anything you want to bring up.
Yeah. Let me see. What else do I have? Okay. Well, so yeah. Okay, so I kind of brought this up earlier, but then we sort of got sidetracked. We didn't discuss it that much. So this idea that, so in theory, you would want to, you'd be in support or in favor of deregulating things like the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act, and just having like pollution be enforced through like lawsuits.
Well, yeah, and I think also property too. So if you own part of, like, you could own lakes or stuff like that, right? You're not going to necessarily want to pollute your own lake, I don't think.
Right. So I think the two issues there with that, just logistically, are that one, this idea that, so there's like, you have like, in terms of pollution, there's two types. There's like point source pollution and non-point source, right? Point source being like a smokestack, like, oh, look, that's polluting. And non-point source being kind of more like hidden, like runoff, like pesticides and fertilizer running off into a river. You can't like be like, oh, it came from there. It kind of just came from all those farms in the area. And I think it would be hard in that situation necessarily to reinforce runoff, like reinforce this on non-point source pollution, because where do you, like, are you, like, who are you suing? In the same way that like the air quality, even if it is from a smokestack, it's going to be from smokestacks, throughout the city, like LA. And again, with this corruption and bureaucracy, it's really hard for me to imagine a world where people file a lawsuit against, like a massive one against like car companies for having vehicles that don't have good fuel efficiency, and against like different companies for polluting the air, and somehow manage to win and like the amount of, and win so much that it becomes not profitable for these companies to continue to pollute. And the other issue being, when it comes to land, I think that's kind of an optimistic perspective. I would like for that to be like humans want to kind of cherish the land they own and not ruin it. But I think for a lot of people, when it becomes a situation where it's profitable to potentially destroy this land, you purchase some land and it's profitable to destroy it and get the resources from it or pollute it in order to continue to make money, it's going to kind of be an issue. It's hard for me to imagine that these large corporations care enough about the land to not do that.
Yeah. Well, I think there's sort of like a problem with like lack of respect for the commons. So you can go like this side of the road, there's usually like litter on it, right?
Right.
If you have a backyard and it's messy, it's not really litter, it's just kind of dirty.
Sure.
But if somebody else throws it into your yard, then it's littering.
Right.
You have the intent to clean that up eventually if there's a little mess. But so I think the problem is where you have any kind of common place where there's no clear who owns this, whose this is, you're going to see like people not respecting it necessarily.
Right. And that's where, and I think you're right. And hopefully that would be, in theory, that should be the situation, I think, where the government steps in like something like the air, right? Where the government then enforces laws. Like, if you're responsible for polluting this area, then then you have to take responsibility for that. I just don't see, like, in a free market situation where the government isn't regulating this, like how do you force somebody to take responsibility for polluting the air or polluting, like I'm on the side of the road, like polluting like a river.
The air, that's kind of complicated because you can't really claim air.
Right.
But I don't know if regulations would be in place, but if you can like kind of prove that somebody is actually harming the air and not really taking into account for other people, I think there would be reason to sue somebody.
Sure. Right. But like, let's say that we got rid of the Clean Air Act, or we just abolished that. What I think you would probably see is you'd see like, and then let's talk about like a city like LA or New York. You'd probably see, maybe not New York actually. Let's talk about LA. What you'd probably see in the LA area is you would see these companies that are being limited by the Clean Air Act. Now they're not. They would just be polluting more, right? They're going to be making more profit. They can be more profitable if they don't try to limit their air pollution. And so they're going to be polluting the air more. And I think first of all, then you don't necessarily see these like immediate victims, because there are people maybe with respiratory issues who are victims of that. but a lot of that's just going up and heating the atmosphere. And you know, that doesn't, while that has issues for everybody, it's hard for like one person to be like, oh yeah, this company polluting into the air and causing the atmosphere to get hotter, whatever caused this negative impact on me. So how would the free market in that situation, then how would you deal with that?
So I think that would be more like a local issue, like a local town or somebody. They would be responsible for suing these companies on the town's behalf. They could find some way to, I don't know, maybe redistribute the money, or the money could go towards state funds or something like that. But so I don't think it would be necessarily an individual suing the air company, but more of maybe the government or the state or something like that.
But you know, that makes sense. But like, on what grounds would you even be suing them, right? Because they're not
You'd be suing for just for hurting the air, for destroying the air, for not taking into account other people. So if you can show that their smoke is actually making an impact on that community, right?
Sure.
It's actually decreasing the value of, or I don't know though.
Right. No, I
can't
get
think
what,
of my words, but
I get what you're saying. Like the idea that, like, you know, they're polluting them hurts the community, and the community can sue them for it. But I think the biggest issue with that is just this idea that a lot of the damage that their pollution would be doing wouldn't be hurting the community directly. It would be like because like, you know, the vast majority of that pollution doesn't like go down and lower the air quality. It would go up into the atmosphere, and then, you know. So I think when you see a lot of that happening, you have a lot of these factories that are maybe hurting their community a little bit, but maybe not enough to necessarily get a lawsuit. But meanwhile, because of the lack of regulations, are now really polluting the atmosphere. Then it kind of just really makes the problem worse, you know.
Yeah, you'll have to look more into air, because I'm not really great on necessarily air.
Yeah, it's kind of a niche issue.
Do you have any other points?
Let me see if I have anything else. Yeah, I already talked about, you know, I don't think that Americans believe enough in climate change necessarily. Okay, wait, this I've kind of talked about.
I have one other thing, maybe.
Yeah.
So, do you generally agree with the Kuznets curve, or?
Honestly, I'm to a certain extent, I'm kind of undecided on that issue. Honestly, I think there's definitely some validity to it.
All right, so you're kind of undecided.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually,
Okay.
here I have one other thing, I think. Yeah, I guess we could talk about this if you want. It's kind of in the same. Actually, it's kind of in the same vein. But like, so like you would also not be. So, in theory, if we're abolishing regulations, you would be okay with like you wouldn't want the government to have any say in like the types of like pesticides being used, right? Like the EPA shouldn't be able to regulate pesticides.
So you mean like so like I don't know, like the weed killer, stuff like that, or
or stuff that like just farmers use,
or the farmers use,
like either thing, right?
Well, I mean, we've been seeing Monsanto, they've been getting sued like crazy because their products are harmful to individuals. So I mean, you can kind of see with that, it's pretty easy to prove that it's actually damaging people. I think there would be incentives for companies to make sure their product is safe before putting it out on the market. I think there generally is some incentive to make sure their product isn't terrible. So there's that. And then also, like you said, like earlier, like the water can travel, like it doesn't necessarily stay in one place when you spray these places. But if you're hurting somebody else, if there's a river and you're hurting somebody else's water, if you can prove that their pesticides are damaging your water supply too, I think there's grounds for some sort of lawsuit there.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of, that I feel like it's kind of maybe my biggest just issue in general with that, like the free market environmentalism philosophy. It's just that it doesn't feel like the idea that you're going to kind of leave the responsibility of enforcing or preventing companies from damaging the environment on the people just seems kind of iffy, because sometimes when you damage the environment, it doesn't necessarily have a direct harm on people, right? Like deforestation, if somebody or air pollution, or even water pollution, maybe doesn't necessarily harmfully affect somebody. Maybe it runs out into the ocean and then it hurts like some ecosystem there. And it just kind of feels like that's like you're not necessarily going to see realistically that effect of them, treating the environment poorly. You're not going to necessarily see a direct like line from there to it hurting somebody. Yeah. So it's going to just, I have a hard time seeing it being enforced.
Well, I think there will be, obviously I can't foresee the future, but I think there'll be some sort of technological advancement at some point in the future to kind of revert some of the damages we've already done to the environment, right? So I can't think of what the exact name of the thing is, but there's a thing that basically sucks CO2 out of the air. You're probably familiar with that.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that.
But like that's one interesting idea, and I think there will be plenty of nonprofits. And I think generally people care about their environment, care about their future offspring being able to survive,
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think you necessarily need the government to clean up the world. I think people will want to do it because I think generally most people care, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a little bit naive, but
yeah. No, I hope that's accurate. I think to a certain extent it is. But just, yeah, especially like in America, it's just like people are so divided right now. There are groups of people that just don't believe in climate change just kind of because they just don't want to think about that. But no, hopefully, I hope that you're right and that people do decide like, oh, we should probably start taking care of the environment a little better.
yeah.
But yeah.
There's like lots of companies right now that clean trash out of the ocean. Well, not companies, but nonprofits. There's plenty of nonprofits that try to take care of the environment. And I think part of it is being more socially aware of what we're doing. And I think we all sort of have our own individual responsibility to kind of spread the message, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't see a problem with the government spreading the message either if they want to.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe maybe the point where we just sort of like diverge there is I think that the government, when it's an issue this severe, I think it's preferable that the government kind of guides the people in their correct direction there. And I think without the government, that there's just it's and especially with and I know that kind of the government lends to itself to bureaucracy and corruption, but I think that without the government, when you have these massive corporations, it's hard without government intervention for just like the people, like these nonprofits, to be able to counter the amount of damage that they're doing to the environment.
Yeah. I don't see ourselves with, especially the political divide we're at right now, with being able to do anything substantial, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's true. I'm on here, debating and saying I should have a carbon tax, but there's no way that a carbon tax is going to get implemented. I don't think, just because people would be really upset about it, which is unfortunate. But
I don't think we're going to revert to free market capitalism anytime soon.
Yeah.
As much as we can hope. But honestly, I think doing nothing is the worst. But
yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
We agree on that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Do you want to finish this off?
Yeah, sure. I've kind of exhausted my list of points. Yeah. Should we do like a closing statement or anything, or?
I don't really have one. You can.
No, I don't either. Yeah. I don't know. I think actually in general, I've done, a few debates. I think we share more common ground than most people I've debated with. I think that it's important that climate change is obviously a real issue. It's important that the American people kind of figure that out. I think my biggest issue really with free market, with this free market environmentalism idea is just the idea that I just have a hard time imagining the people being able to enforce like kind of this protect the environment against like these
Yeah.
massive corporations without the government's influence. But yeah, I think it's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah. I think it was pretty productive. There's some things I definitely need to look over more in my argument. So thanks for pointing those out. And I think we found some good common ground. So I think that was definitely good. And hopefully we do something out of nothing. So
Yeah, we'll see. Hope so. Yeah.
I'll unmute some people. They want to talk.
Oh, I already unmuted myself, but
Oh,
I think Jose
that's cool.
wanted to be unmuted.
I tried to.
Oh, suck.
Is the camera inverted on here?
I think
I
so.
think it is.
Good. This was more of a discussion than it was a debate. But
Yeah, I'd agree.
very productive between the two.
It was
It was
productive.
very productive.
I think you guys found a lot of common ground, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that you guys differ on is whose responsibility it is on to create innovations to stop the global